weight in boxing is they have different classes for that, and wrestling and whatnot. That's obviously something that needed to happen. But why doesn't that exist in more sophisticated sports like team sports? Because basically, essentially what you're doing is you're sacrificing skill for people who just happen to be taller or bigger based on genetics or nutrition. So you're basically missing out on a lot of athleticism. A sport like boxing, which actually should be illegal because it's so primitive and just mind-numbingly stupid, why anyone would ever play that or watch that, even those idiots can figure out that you need different weight classes and whatnot. So why wouldn't you have different height classes in basketball? Why couldn't anyone figure this out, that this needs to happen like 100 years ago? Anyway, so I looked up just how skillful is the Filipino basketball team. In other words, if they had the same height as Lithuanians and Americans, of course Serbians and Montenegrins as well, how would they compare in actual skill? So it says, well, they would be competitive, but probably still not quite as good, essentially, is what it says in this, if you want to like look this up yourself. It gets into like the specific styles of play and whatnot. And you could really say something about like this about Angola as well. So I don't think Filipino basketball and Angola basketball is quite as developed as like Lithuanians, Serbian and American and Slovenian basketball, but if they had the same levels of economics and nutrition and whatnot, they would be highly competitive and regularly beat these top tier teams. Even though I still think, like Serbians and Lithuanians and whatnot would win more often. But at least you would have a better comparison of skills. So nutrition is such an important element. Yes, of course, genetics is important. Southeast Asians are genetically shorter from what I understand on average. However, a lot of that is nutrition. So after they have a few generations in Western countries, they're not quite as tall as everyone else, but they're very close. So you're going to see a lot of them in professional sports if, culture and stuff was different. So that's another thing, is that, the culture, Asian American culture, for instance, is not, they don't play sports to the degree that white or black Americans play sports. It's just, they have different standards, even after a couple generations. Sure, that might eventually wash out, and it has to some degree, but there's still a big difference there. But as far as height goes, after a couple generations, they're going to be almost as tall as white Americans, black Americans. So again, and this is true with Africans too, but I think it said this in the, here in this chat I had with AI, but Africans, a lot of the Africans that come to America are of wealthier classes. That's not always the case, but if you're around those communities, you notice that the richer ones are a little bit taller, and then the ones that come from like the poorer areas are shorter. But when you're dealing with like Filipinos, a lot of them, most of them aren't coming from a wealthier class. They're coming from poorer classes, so they're already coming here shorter than they would otherwise be. So there's a whole bunch of different aspects to this conversation, but mainly the point is that you should have different classes for heights in a sport like basketball and other sports. Like for instance, like Ultimate, it's a Frisbee sport. I watched it once like 10, 20 years ago, or whenever the World Championship was on, and I was watching USA versus Japan, and everyone was commenting like, oh, the Japanese are so much more skilled, but they're shorter. So you're basically just watching guys who are taller and less skilled beat guys who are shorter and more skilled. It's really nonsensical. Like, sports fans in the West have this obsession with watching like big, huge, sweaty men. I don't understand it at all. I would rather watch people with more skill.